Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Tickets Please. I'm your host, Josiah Wampfler. On this episode, I'll start with one of the biggest movies of last year. The Broadway musical finally brought to the big screen, Wicked. How well does director John M. Chu make the leap from stage to screen? And what is it about this story that supposedly makes it so relevant to right now? Then I'll talk about director Jesse Eisenberg's new film, starring himself and Kieran Culkin, A Real Pain. What makes this story of two cousins on a Holocaust tour so funny and profound? Finally, I'll wrap up by highlighting one of the most arresting film experiences I've had in quite some time: Palestine's official submission to this year's Academy Awards, From Ground Zero, a collection of 22 shorts created in Gaza over the last year. It's all ahead on this episode of Two Tickets Please, so let's start by discussing Wicked. Since its premiere on Broadway in 2003, Wicked has become one of the most popular American musicals of all time. A prequel and alternate telling of The Wizard of Oz that sheds light on the origins of the Wicked Witch of the West, the musical very quickly became an obsession of theater kids everywhere. Especially in the late 2000s, you'd be hard-pressed to find a high school theater or choir program that didn't feature the musical itself or its hit songs. Despite many of my own classmates performing those songs at solo and ensemble competitions, I was never able to catch a proper stage production of the musical, and always hoped that a film adaptation might come along to remedy that blind spot. 2 decades later, we finally have the first act of that adaptation. And while it made me fall in love with the musical itself, as a work of cinema and adaptation, it leaves much to be desired. Wicked is a wild expansion of the Wizard of Oz lore that tells the origin stories of Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, and Glinda the Good, complicating the good versus evil narrative we're all familiar with in the original story. A classic tale of enemies to friends, or even lovers, as Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande hint at in their performances, and even more so in their press tour. The two navigate a rocky relationship at roommates at Shiz University, a school for witchcraft in the land of Oz. Elphaba, while ridiculed for her green skin, is quickly recognized by her teachers for her magical abilities, and slowly her relationship with Glinda and the other students improves. But it is all turned upside down when she discovers how the talking animals of Oz are facing systemic discrimination, and takes a stand against their oppression. Behind the curtain of the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, Elphaba finds a powerful political tale that was certainly resonant when the musical premiered during the George W. Bush administration, and is once again relevant to our current predicament: the rise of fascism. In the stage production, that tale is told through magnificent music, beautiful costuming, colorful sets, and dynamic lighting. In director John M. Chu's film, the music is as great as ever, but many of the other elements just aren't as vibrant. The chief problem is the color grading of the film. There are some wonderfully elaborate sets and eye-catching costumes at times, but all of it is sapped of life by the flat, low-contrast grading. This is the prequel to The Wizard of Oz, after all, a marvel of early Technicolor filmmaking. So it is strange that there is very little of that vibrancy to be found in Wicked. Of course, having a menagerie of differently colored characters set against a world filled with every color in the rainbow can present difficulties when trying to make your subjects really pop. But rather than spend the time to solve these problems with carefully considered production design, say as the original Wizard of Oz did, Chu and his team apparently decided just to flatten out the entire color spectrum, so we could always count on Elphaba's green skin and Glinda's pink outfits to stand out. It is a solution, I suppose, but a cowardly one considering the legacy he's trying to build upon. The flattening of the image is further exacerbated by some pretty boring lighting choices and an over-reliance on digital backgrounds. Nowhere is that more destructive than in the climax of the film and the highlight of the entire musical, Defying Gravity. Erivo's vocals carry the entire sequence, as she belts out the song so brilliantly, I think she ends up being even better than Idina Menzel, who originated the role. But while the stage production often uses a spotlight and dynamic backlighting to train its audience's focus solely on Elphaba, the film version of Defying Gravity starts in a dark, nondescript location and ends with Erivo flying around amidst the sludge of a digital background. The number is further sapped of its energy by additional stoppages in the music that are completely pointless and destroy the momentum the song relies on. So no matter how brilliant Erivo's vocals are, the climax of Choose Wicked just can't possibly match the emotional impact that audiences have raved about for years with the stage production. There are still moments of brilliance in Chu's direction of this material, though. One of the musical's other highlight songs, What Is This Feeling?, a duet between Elphaba and Galinda, wonderfully uses the language of film montage to propel the number forward. Casting Jonathan Bailey as the pretty boy Fiyero turned out to be a brilliant decision, and he nearly steals the entire show in his performance of Dancing Through Life. Plus, the number features some of the best choreography from the background dancers, some really inventive production design, and shows Chu's talent for sweeping camera movement. And thankfully, one of the musical's most indelible songs, Popular, is definitely the showstopper it deserves to be. Though I think that Grande's performance far exceeds anything that Chu is doing behind the camera there. It has been a theme throughout this review, but Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande, and Jonathan Bailey really are far and away the main reason Wicked works at all. I'm surprised to say it, but Grande ended up being my favorite performance of the bunch. She is truly a revelation, bringing us the ridiculously ditzy Galinda audiences have fallen in love with over the years, and showing a real sense of comedic timing. Plus, her vocals are thankfully much more musical theater than pop star, which was one of my main concerns going into the film. I do wish we got a bit more nuance from her at times, as she is fairly one note throughout the film, but she's so good at hitting that note, it's hard not to fall in love with her. Jonathan Bailey is also tremendous as the overly confident Fiyero. He is a beautiful man with an even more beautiful voice, and like Grande, excels in the comedic moments of the part. Though he also brings the nuance I was hoping for from her, giving you the sense that there is something deeper about this man than meets the eye. Erivo as a musical talent is completely unimpeachable. I got goosebumps every time she would break into song, and she has an undeniable charisma that draws you into her character. That being said, that charisma only goes so far, as once you get closer, it is hard at times to really get a sense of the inner life of this character. This isn't all on Erivo, though, as we know she is fully capable of delivering knockout dramatic performances. But here there are too many moments where it feels like she doesn't really know what to do. Ultimately a fault of this screenplay and the decision to stretch this story to its breaking point. The film, despite only covering the first act, runs longer than a typical performance of the entire musical. Yet it doesn't feel like they used that extra time to deepen the story's themes or its character development much at all. It explores the plight of the animals of Oz a tad more, and spends a bit more time in Elphaba's backstory, but a lot of the added time just weighs the pacing of the story down. Plus, the famous queer subtext between Elphaba and Galinda feels like it has been better explored in Erivo and Grande's press tour than the film itself. Stage musicals are often broad in their themes, and Wicked is no exception. But the language of cinema offers an opportunity to expand on theme through how a story is literally framed, the details included in those frames, and the sequence in which these images are presented to an audience. One shot in Steven Spielberg's criminally underrated 2021 remake of West Side Story is a perfect example of this. As the members of the Jets gang trash a police precinct during the musical number G Officer Krupke, they sing about how they are sociologically sick, and Spielberg deftly cuts to a terrified female secretary framed behind a metal cage that separates her from these men. Amidst the fun, catchy song, it reminds us how unscrupulous these men actually are, and foreshadows the threat that they will pose to a female character later on in the film. In Wicked, such deft use of the cinematic language is nearly non-existent. It's a story that should feel incredibly relevant to our current moment, yet its presentation is so vague that it can't possibly feel prescient. This is a story about a marginalized character who decides to take a stand in solidarity with another group that is being oppressed by a rising fascist movement. It's a story about an overly confident woman seated firmly within the upper echelons of the hierarchy, who is confronted with conflicting allegiances to her marginalized friend and her own personal advancement. It is about two women whose rocky relationship is dripping with queer subtext to be mined. Yet all of this is far more interesting in the aggregate than it is in the disparate images that Chu has assembled to tell this story. The camera is mostly used to make all of this look as aesthetically cool as possible, not to deepen our understanding of the themes running through this work. Having now viewed a bootleg version of the stage production and knowing where this story goes, I fear Chu's flattening of this work, both thematically and aesthetically, will only feel worse when part 2 comes out. Much like musicals like Into the Woods, this story only gets darker in the second half. And though its themes will likely feel even more relevant 1 year into the Trump administration, I have no confidence that Chu will be able to deliver on those themes. There are many plot points I know are coming that don't seem to have been properly set up in the first part already. So for as wonderful as the music in this film truly is, as tremendous as the performances are, and as enjoyable as the experience ended up being at points, Wicked ultimately ends up being a far better advertisement for a trip to the theater to see a stage production than it is as a work of cinema. That's not all bad. The musical is great, and I look forward to catching it live one day. But after waiting 20 years to see one of the most popular American musicals of all time on the silver screen, I can't help but wonder why we couldn't get a better creative team to deliver on that promise. Perhaps one day someone else will get a go at it. And perhaps it will feel more in line with the magic of The Wizard of Oz than just another big, flat Hollywood CGI fest that this ended up being. I'm giving Wicked 3 out of 5 stars. It is currently out in theaters and on VOD. When I think of comedy, I don't typically think of the Holocaust. Yet director and writer Jesse Eisenberg's new film, A Real Pain, about two cousins embarking on a Holocaust tour of Poland and visiting the home their grandmother fled, has some of the funniest moments of any film I saw in 2024. It was also one of the most profound, exploring depression and alienation amidst the backdrop of one of the world's greatest crimes in such a deeply moving way that I was left nearly speechless afterward. Even now, the emotions I felt leaving the theater can't fully be put into words, but I know this. There are many movies that deal with mental health, but I've seen few that get at the true complexity of grappling with human emotion in this dark world like A Real Pain. The second feature from Eisenberg as a director, A Real Pain, is a classic odd couple setup. Eisenberg's David is neurotic and socially awkward, while Culkin's Benji is a social butterfly that lights up a room when he walks in. David has a stable career with a wife and child at home, while Benji is anything but stable, floating through life without a real plan in mind. David tries hard to conceal his emotions at all times, while Benji wears them on his sleeve, for better and for worse. As is the case with many familial relationships, these are two men who likely would never have anything to do with one another, but for the fact that they are cousins. But after the recent death of their grandmother, David decides that the time is right to finally take the trip to her homeland that they'd always talked about, reigniting a relationship that may have remained frozen forever in their childhood years. A Real Pain has many strengths, but Eisenberg's beautifully written screenplay is paramount to its success. Chock full of deeply poignant dialogue, as well as a keen sense of humor, Eisenberg explores the generational trauma of the Holocaust, the joys and difficulties of family relationships, the complicated reality of depression and anxiety, and the ways in which we discuss pain, both personal and societal more broadly. I say explore because A Real Pain does not offer definitive answers, but merely poses questions. For cousins David and Benji, the immediate question that arises is, what are they to each other now that their grandmother is gone? Has the link that bound them together been severed? Now that their lives have diverged in such dramatic fashion, can they let go of the expectations of who the other should be and continue on as the people that they actually are, no matter how odd their coupling? Of course, this dynamic wouldn't transfer from page to screen as well as it does without the incredible performances of Eisenberg and Culkin. These are by no means atypical roles for either actor, as Eisenberg has played plenty of neurotic characters, and Culkin is the king of fast-talking socialites racked with emotional distress. But the ease they find in playing these roles undoubtedly contributes to the emotional depth they are able to find, and how real their relationship as cousins feels. Both are tremendous in the numerous comedic moments throughout the film, and when both men are given space to truly open up and tell the world how they really feel, the weight of these actors' past work quickly fades and they truly disappear into their characters. The most profound moments of A Real Pain come when the tour group finally visits the city of Lublin and the Majdanek concentration camp located just 2 miles from the bustling town square. As they tour the city and their tour guide James shows them the distinct memories of Jewish life hidden throughout, Eisenberg's camera lovingly captures the beauty of the city. The peaceful walkways, the gorgeous architecture, the resilient evidence of the once vibrant Jewish community are captured with ardent care. Bathed in brilliant golden light and backed with a tranquil piano score, Eisenberg conjures a wistfulness, not unlike when Benji speaks about his memories with his grandmother, or with David when they were young. But that golden light fades, and the piano falls silent when the tour arrives at Majdanek concentration camp. The group walks silently through the dormitories, the bathhouses, the gas chambers, in stunned silence. Looking at the piles of shoes left behind by the Nazis' victims, even Benji is left speechless and gasps when David reaches out to touch his shoulder. As tour guide James says, the place speaks for itself, and Eisenberg's camera shows us that with still, haunting shots of this industrialized site of mass murder. A shot of the group gazing upon a mound of ash that was once thousands of real people is perhaps the most horrifying shot in the entire film. As the group drives away from the camp, the piano score slowly returns, as they return to the city that sat within sight and earshot of the crime scene they just left. Inside the van, the group is visibly shaken, shocked into silence. But as the camera moves in, we see Benji's shock has turned into anguish, as he is doubled over, sobbing next to David. "We completely cut ourselves off from anyone else's true pain," Benji says earlier in the film, distressed by the experience of this group of Jews riding in first class on a train that 80 years ago would have been used to transport them to their deaths. Later, Eloge, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide and convert to Judaism, puts it quite eloquently. "I find myself constantly baffled by the way the world seems to carry on, like there aren't a million reasons to be shocked, appalled, ignoring the proverbial slaughterhouse to enjoy the steak." David throughout is annoyed with how emotional Benji often gets and says that there is a time and place to grieve. In one of Eisenberg's highlight scenes, he talks about how he doesn't feel right burdening others with his own personal pain because he doesn't find it particularly exceptional. And it is in these moments where A Real Pain makes its most daring and powerful statement, that there is a connection between the ways in which we refuse to reckon with the human suffering of the world around us, and how we close ourselves off from dealing with our own pain, and the pain of those close to us. You can see it in how we constantly feel the need to turn to jokes to avoid talking about anything that may feel uncomfortably real. How many of us have a family member or friend who we know is hurting, but have failed to reach out to? You can also see it in the way we so quickly move on from the tragedies in our world, like mass shootings, or how the ongoing genocide in Gaza or the horrifying civil war in Sudan have been pushed to the back of our collective mind. Eisenberg is by no means equating David and Benji's mental health struggles to the horror of the Holocaust. David is right. His pain is not exceptional. But isn't that the point? Collectively, we all share something, and confronting that pain with each other is the only way forward. Of course, doing so is difficult and complicated, and Eisenberg seems to recognize that in this film more than others. There is only so much we can do for ourselves and others to ease the pain or advance justice in this world. Sometimes the pain is just too great. Nevertheless, silence is certainly not the answer. To paraphrase Benji, maybe if we actually reckoned with the tragedies of this world, sad stuff wouldn't constantly happen. When David apologizes to Benji for always falling asleep when they were young and wandering around New York at night, Benji tells him, "I didn't care that you'd fall asleep, man. I was just glad that you were there." We can't solve all the world's problems or ease all of our pain, but just being there for one another can go a long way. I'm giving A Real Pain 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is currently available on VOD. In the spirit of not shying away from the pain of this world, I wanted to end by highlighting the powerful new anthology film, From Ground Zero. Palestine's official submission to this year's Academy Awards, this vital collection of 22 short films from various filmmakers in Gaza was created under Israeli bombardment and blockade over the last year, and assembled by Palestinian filmmaker Rashid Masharawi. The films range from 3 to 7 minutes in length and span a variety of genres and styles, from narrative fiction, documentary, experimental, animation, and even puppetry. Each one is an expression of their creator's personal style, crafted under tremendous restrictions, all woven together into an incredible portrait of a people facing an ongoing genocide. Over the last 15 months, those of us who have been paying close attention to Israel's war on Gaza, especially those who follow Palestinian journalists on social media, have seen an incredible amount of carnage. We've seen video after video of relentless bombing, starving people, bloody children, and once vibrant cities turned to rubble and ash. Journalists, of course, report on events and often deal in numbers. 20 civilians killed in a school, 50 bombed in their tents, hundreds killed near a hospital. The numbers can become numbing, obscuring the actual humans they represent and the lives of those who must carry on without them. From Ground Zero, while heartbreaking, is not numbing. Gone are the cold numbers and statistics as we are confronted with the diverse perspectives of these filmmakers and their daily routines. In these stories, we see our shared humanity reflected on the screen. Every filmmaker here has tales of immense loss. In one of the most heartrending moments, midway through a film, the filmmaker appears on screen to tell us she was unable to see it through to completion after the death of her family made the experience too painful. But we also see an undeniable sense of hope. It is not naive hope, as the people of Gaza cannot afford such luxuries, but the hope found in placing a message in a bottle, as the first filmmaker does in the opening film, imagining someone, anyone, might share in your pain. The hope inherent in continuing to struggle on each day. To create art, especially under circumstances like these, is in itself an immense expression of hope. The value of art amidst struggle is a constant theme throughout From Ground Zero. In Sorry Cinema, director Ahmad Hassana reminisces on his past award-winning productions, now a distant memory as he stares at his clapboard and spends his days running from bombs and trying to find food. In Nadal Damo's Everything is Fine, a stand-up comedian prepares for a show, only to find that the venue has been bombed, so he performs for a group of children instead. In the film No, director Hannah Awad finds a group of musicians who say no to the darkness and destruction around them and choose hope through music. Director Nida Abu Hasna's Out of Frame follows an artist as she surveys her past work, dusty and damaged in the ruins of her home, but still incredibly beautiful. In Ala Ayoub's Overburden, a female novelist regrets leaving behind her books when she fled her home, worried they would weigh her down. In one of the most profound lines of the entire collection, she says, "What is the weight of books compared to that of this oppression?" Throughout From Ground Zero, the individual styles, distinct concerns, and the very souls of these filmmakers shine through. There's a famous Jewish saying, often repeated by pro-Palestinian Jews throughout this conflict, that every life is a universe. You see that in the art that these filmmakers have miraculously delivered to us from across the world. No filmmaker, writer, or artist should ever have to tell the story of their own extermination, producer Michael Moore said of this stunning collection of films. And while such art from the heart of a genocide is rare, it is not without precedent. In many ways, From Ground Zero recalls the work of Jewish photographers Heinrich Ross and Mendel Grossman, who documented daily life in the Lodz ghetto in Poland during the Holocaust. At great risk to their own safety, they captured the deplorable conditions of the ghetto, the resolute spirit of their people, and the eventual deportations to the concentration camps. Grossman himself was sent to a labor camp and killed during a death march, still holding his camera. Ross survived the war and later testified against the high-ranking Nazi official Adolf Eichmann. The images of From Ground Zero stand in their lineage, not taken by either perpetrators or liberators, but by the very people facing death. As film critic Siddhant Adlakha points out in his review, in that vein, it's hard to ignore just how much From Ground Zero feels like history unfolding, and tragedy being memorialized right before our eyes. Driving home from the theater afterward, my friend and I sat in still silence, grappling with what could be said after such an experience. At a certain point, I nearly had to pull over to the side of the road, as all the emotion finally hit me. Eventually, I knew there was only one thing that could be said, that respected the struggle of the people of Gaza. Making art like this amidst a genocide is an act of immeasurable bravery, and a reminder to us all that if Palestinians can find hope, what is our excuse? I don't know how it will happen or when the day will come, but we must continue to hope for and continue to fight for an end to this genocide and a free Palestine. From Ground Zero is likely gone from theaters at this point, but please look for it soon on VOD. It should be essential viewing for every American, given our complicity in this carnage. That will do it for this episode of 2 Tickets Please. You can find more of my written content at 2ticketsplease.substack.com. Thanks for watching.